Welcome to Nourishing the Mother, an inspired conversation space between Bridget Wood and Julie Tenner on the journey of motherhood through the common thread of parenting, relationship, and sexuality as a path to consciousness.
We keep our conversations honest, our experiences real, and our philosophies exploratory. We believe that in order to raise incredible humans, we first have to raise ourselves. We know that in order to rock the family, you've got to nourish the mother. If you are here, you care about paving a path of conscious and intentional motherhood, connected with yourself and your gifts, and also illuminating your children in theirs so we may raise more whole humans who can impact this world in a more humane way.
If you desire to integrate your learnings practically and supportively, head on over to bridgetwood.life or julietenner.love to go deeper. And for all live-streamed, pre-release podcasts and all our free content, head over to our free Facebook group, Nourishing the Mother with Bridget Wood and Julie Tenner. We are Julie Tenner and Bridget Wood, and we are so grateful you're here.
Hello and welcome to Nourishing the Mother. I'm Bridget Wood.
And I'm Julie Tenner. And today, as part of our Relationship Taboo podcast series, we're having a conversation with the beautiful Dasha Clarke on open and alternative relationships, relating and structures, relationship structures. So it's a juicy invitation into what else exists beyond monogamy. And we're very excited to listen to the experience of this beautiful woman and share in a conversation that may take us in many different directions. So before we jump into that, I'd love to remind you to jump onto nourishingthemother.com.au, scroll on down to the red banner, drop in your email address, and you are part of the email community where you won't miss a beat. So nourishingthemother.com.au. So I just want to quickly welcome the beautiful Dasha Clarke, who is a circle facilitator and intimacy and embodiment muse. Welcome, Dasha.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here, Dasha. It is I just love that we're doing this because our podcast can very easily be all about monogamous long-term relationship, because that is Julie's and my experience. And over the years we've had many emails and much feedback from different women from different walks of life and different experiences of relationship. And so I really feel like this is a great conversation to be having that will shed light on that. But first I would love to begin with where you began, and perhaps whether monogamy was always where you thought you'd go, and what it looked like to be opened to the concept of open relating. What's your story?
Wow. First of all, I agree that it is a very valuable conversation to have, and I was so excited when I received the invitation because it is such a taboo subject, and listening to a conversation like the one we're about to have would have been so immensely valuable for me at the beginning of my story in this chapter. So I'm thrilled to sort of step up and be able to offer that, because I'm currently having lots of really behind the scenes direct messaging, private messaging conversations with people, and I just thought, gosh, this is actually quite common, but it's not spoken about, and it's not just you and Julie who have that experience. It's a large big demographic in our population that has that. Like, monogamy is the main it is the main and most accepted relationship structure. So anything outside of mainstream and acceptable is a little
taboo.
It is taboo, and therefore scary and lonely. So I'm excited to have this conversation and share a little bit about my experience, and hopefully it offers some value or some curiosity and some exploration for other people, or maybe even some comfort, I hope, that it does exist, that things beyond monogamy do exist. So I have been I was in a heterosexual monogamous relationship for 14 years with my partner, who was my husband now, and married for, I think this is our 4th year of marriage. And last year just before our first lockdown last year, we opened up our relationship. And that is something that I never thought would happen, never thought that it would be a structure that we explored. I think that the thing about monogamous relationships is that there can be such a default, and there is so much that we step into and roles that we just accept and take on without stopping to question them, whether or not they actually fit us or whether they serve our values or our purpose in life. And so we can often feel like there might be something missing. And I was very, very grateful in hindsight that our relationship opened up from my partner's side. So having worked in doula work and with women and having a high value on relationships, it's something that I have self-studied for a long time. Relationship skills, knowing myself, getting to understand my partner. And even with all of that self-study and practice, as is often the case in long-term relationships, we pigeonhole our partners. And I had pigeonholed my partner to be this strictly monogamous person who would never consider open relating. And I had tons of friends and tons of people I'd worked with through relationship work and study where I saw different structures, and I just thought, that couldn't work for me. Because much like, I guess, in Tantra and in conversations I've had with you, Julie, in the past, there seems to be this really split picture between either really, really wholesome and monogamous and the family picture, or couples that are of the same cloth breathing together in an island in Bali. There's so much space in between. So what happened to start our journey was that we were in a really, really good place in our relationship. And I don't know if it's a personal trait of mine, but when things feel really, really, really good in life, I'm waiting for that next spurt of growth to come. And like things are really good. I've put in a lot of work and a lot of study, and we've really been through some stuff, and this feels solid. I'm satisfied, yet unfulfilled. And I couldn't put a finger on what that was. So I was waiting for this next wave of growth to come. And I could not have predicted that it was in the form of my husband approaching me with a level of honesty that I have so much admiration for, to share that he had developed some feelings for somebody and he didn't know what to do with them and where to put them. And it was confusing because his feelings for me hadn't changed in any way, but he really didn't want to not explore and experience what these other feelings were. So we had a conversation about it, and it was really important to the both of us that the conversation was not centered around permission. It wasn't about asking for permission to explore something. It was about stepping up and being authentic and honest about desires and ways to ethically and consensually explore them. So that was the conversation. That was how it started. It was an awkward, vulnerable, brutally honest conversation about some intense feelings that my partner was having for somebody else. And I knew the person and I liked the person. So I was open to seeing where that went.
Were you open straight away, or was there a conflict of feeling? Like, did jealousy come up, or did, like that kind of reactionary part of you that wants to take ownership come up? Like, what was the immediate reaction for you before you got to the place of like, yes, I'm ready to explore this too?
I just honestly, my initial reaction was complete reverence for how much courage I think it took from him to sit there and share that with me.
Yeah,
there were so many options that he could have chosen to deal with that. And I think, a lot of the time people will find themselves in really sticky, tricky situations because they didn't have the courage to express that and share it honestly. So the fact that he did that, it immediately was something that I respected and had reverence for. And honesty, right up there with relationships, is the next highest value. I can forgive and understand almost anything, but lying, I find dishonesty very, very hard to come back from. And I find it quite hard to, what's the word? Like, you know, trust is something that's quite fragile once it's broken. And, you know, over 14 years, of course, there have been experiences of trust being fragile and broken and rebuilt. So I know how fragile and how long and how sensitive that can be to rebuild. So therefore, I have such a high value on honesty, because from honesty, it's much easier to navigate because you know where you stand then.
So you weren't having to be reactive or kind of go into that protectionist place, because he had come to you before he'd done anything and kind of laid his heart on the table.
He laid his heart on the table, and I had deep reverence for that. And then that leaned into curiosity. And look, I want to be very honest as well and not paint a super wholesome, positive rainbow picture. There were, you know, quite a few whiskeys that were involved to get to that point that evening where we were sitting by the fire, and he finally went, okay, I'm just going to spit this out. I'm having this situation. And so he was very honest and shared with me exactly what he was processing. And, you know, I won't share the details of that because that's his story. But my response to it was respect, admiration, and then curiosity. What came after that was more emotional for me to navigate, because that initial conversation felt like a really strong connector and a really good place to start exploring something like that, from a very good place of absolute radical honesty. And also accepting responsibility straight up, that, you know, we're responsible for the choices that we make, the behavior that we enact, and it's not on anyone else to permit that for us to do. So that was a great place for us to start. It got messy after that. And where did it go from there?
What got messy?
It got messy because what I guess I hadn't really factored in was energy and it's an attention being dispersed. And so that was very triggering for me. And at the time I was enrolled in doing your course, Embark, and it was so incredibly helpful for me because it was my anchor going through embodiment practices and mastering my own energy and taking responsibility for my desires and how I wanted to respond in any given situation. There was so many times where I thought, if I didn't have this course, if I wasn't learning and practicing these skills, I would be drowning. So what I kept coming back to was that I was the ocean. I cannot drown. I am the ocean. And I really think about a lot of embodiment work as being like the ocean. If you have these waves of energy that go through our body, and emotions are just that, they're energy in motion.
So when you're talking about the dispersing of attention, are you meaning you can see that his attention that used to be fully 100% on you was dispersed between you and another?
Yeah, and also myself as well, things that I wasn't noticing, what I was now noticing. So I became then acutely aware of where he wasn't standing up or participating in my life that I had just allowed through default of monogamous relationships, of especially in the very traditional sense of, you know, the husband going to work and the wife staying at home. And so there were so many areas. It's like, oh, actually, I'm not okay with that. And
it's so interesting. So this kind of brought your relationship into a deeper level of integrity by virtue of you now having this lack of perceived safety or boxing in, and now everything's up for negotiation again. Hang on a minute, am I living my best life here?
Exactly. And it was really, really expansive for me. So for me, going through that, I got triggered a lot by that, having to now assess and notice everything in my life and whether or not it was integrity with me and whether or not I was actively choosing it. And
what did you do if you realized you weren't actively choosing it? What did you do then?
I got angry.
What did you do? Like, what happened?
I got angry, and then I got hurt, and then I had to deal with a lot of it got very, very gnarly at one point there. So I like to think that our first experience into this, so it's been about a year now that we've been, I don't want to say experimenting, we've been exploring this, and I'm very hesitant to put labels on it, which there are quite a lot. There's polyamory, ethical non-monogamy, open relationship. There's so many, we love labels, right? And I struggle with labels because I think we're always so much more than that. And I like to be a little bit of like buffet and take a little bit from here and a little bit from there and see what works for me. So, so I still struggle with labeling what it is. Open just feels the most resonant currently, just saying it's open, because it is. It's not closed. It's not closed and decided. It's open and consciously choosing in each moment and each experience. And so through this first crash course relationship that my partner had, it was one of the most intense emotional rides that I've been through, because it just triggered so much childhood stuff as well. A lot of father wounds came up for me about, abandonment and rejection. And I had the opportunity then to really meet them in a way that I didn't before, because I got to be very discerning about the difference between codependency and co-regulation. And what I found was that for lack of better words, my father wounds, my masculine wounds, were very easy to sort of band-aid over in relationship with a partner. Whereas when I felt like that was slipping away from me, I was then invited to really stand in myself with that. And I had a very profound experience which I can't really share because it was deeply personal for me, but I had a really profound experience meeting my masculine wounds and loving the shit out of them, which actually led me to a very big, liberating sexual reclamation. So something else that I'd really squashed down was the fact of my sexuality, that I have always known that I am not just attracted to men, and I'd always identified as being bisexual, which was really hard to reconcile being in such a long-term heterosexual relationship. So this was then, again, being in that space of knowing that I had the responsibility to choose how I wanted to respond in all of this, rather than being reactive and you would go off and go with her then, or whatever. I got to choose how I wanted to respond. And so my response went from, okay, curious, go and explore this. Oh, this feels abandoning and confronting of my own emotions, to, okay, what is that emotion? What is its message? What is it that you need to meet here? And what I found was that I needed to meet my masculine wounds. I needed to reclaim my sexuality, and I needed to reclaim my sovereignty in all of my choices in those areas. So my response was to, in lockdown of all bloody times, was to jump on a dating app, which I cringed at horrendously and had spent many years going, oh, thank God I don't have to deal with them. That looks horrible. I would not want that experience.
You judge. You bring
That's right. And so that was another big lesson in this experience, is that whatever we are quite harsh and judgy on, life will humble us with. It will throw an experience at us that we completely resist, because we need to meet it. It's all part of meeting all of this stuff that we think is outside of us or too intense or too beyond us. It's not. It is all part of us, and it's all part of integrating our wholeness when we're invited to meet those parts rather than push them away. So I could have pushed all of this away. I could have decided, no, this is too hard. It's not for me. And why I think this conversation is valuable is because I didn't have a lot of people to turn to who understood this or were open to understanding this. They couldn't understand why I wanted to meet this. Why wouldn't it just be easier to say, nah, thanks, and move on and stay in another monogamous relationship? But I wanted to meet it. I was consciously choosing to meet it in each intense interaction. And there were loads of delicious interactions in between that as well. I just don't want to sugarcoat how intense it can be, because like I said, think that in monogamous relationships, especially long term, we can get into a tendency of putting our head in the sand about a lot of things and just moving on with the status quo. Whereas when we are met with intensity and things that feel, like they push our buttons and they feel, different and intense and lonely and isolating, then we have a choice to respond differently and therefore live differently and be different. And I chose that. So it was really interesting observing my partner from a different perspective as well, in a way that I had always pigeonholed him and assumed that I knew so much about him, to then go, well, neither of us have dated anyone for a decade and a half. So getting to watch each other do that was seeing in the other and ourselves other areas that we'd ignored of growth from each other because of comfort. And also realizing, can you love another person beyond what they represent to you as well, like beyond just what they directly are to you? Could I see this man in his vulnerability with another person and see these different attributes come to light in him and still love him? Or was that love only conditional and attached to what he did for me and what he represented to me? So it was extremely expansive. Dating apps were very, very awkward, very awkward. And what I learned really quickly was that I wasn't at all interested in meeting another man at that time in my life at all. But I was deeply, deeply, deeply desiring connecting with women. One, a part of me felt like for an affirmation of what I'd always known to be true of myself, but never fully expressed. And two, because I felt like I was lacking a lot of experience in that area that I really wanted to have. So that was the beginning chapter. And like I said, before we started recording, is that I'm no expert. I would probably define myself as a courageous explorer of open relating as opposed to any kind of a relationship expert. I don't think that it's better or worse than monogamy. I just think it's really important to consider alternative agreements and connections that better serve us rather than not choosing and just doing. Yeah.
I have a couple of questions, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, go for it.
So one is, as you were embarking upon exploring, and it's a very conscious conversation between the two of you, did you put in place agreements?
Yeah. Yeah.
Boundaries for what happened outside and what happened inside, and how much you shared with each other, and did you actually create essentially contracts / agreements that were super clear?
Yeah. Not initially, no, because we didn't know what we were doing. We started out with the agreement that it had to be honest and respectful, and that was all we knew. That was all we knew to begin with. It needs to be honest and respectful. So please don't do anything that you would feel would be disrespecting to you or me or the other person, and please always be honest. And that includes deciding what you do and do not tell me. You may decide not to tell me something because it feels too uncomfortable, but would me not knowing that feel dishonest or respectful? And so I think like much things in life is that we don't really know what our boundaries are until they've been crossed or pushed. And so that is the basis of what all this intensity was in our initial experience, was the fact that we didn't know what our fucking boundaries. Sorry, I didn't know what.
It's okay.
Awesome. I've been holding back so much.
No. Our podcast has a parental advisory warning, so you're all good.
Yes, my whole life needs a parental advisory warning. But yeah, that was the reason why I think that was so intense initially, was because we were trying to learn what our fucking boundaries were, and it hurt trying to learn them. And I think that if we didn't have that solid 14 years of deep work and commitment to each other, where we were committed to our family, we were committed to each other's growth, we knew we weren't responsible for each other's happiness. If we didn't have that foundation, I don't think that it's something we would have kept choosing. I think that I think that, sorry.
I was going to say, what were the agreements that you ended up coming to?
Yeah. So beyond that, beyond going respect and honesty, we then got to points where I was hearing too much. And so then I had to decide, well, what's my boundary around here is actually I don't want it affecting my family life. I don't want it distracting my attention from the priorities of our family life. And then also I didn't want, and this is what I learned really quickly about, there's a big difference between boundaries and rules, that you can do anything you fucking want, but it really is quite difficult creating rules in relationship, because when you have rules, then there's no room for play or response. When you have boundaries, they are much more fluid, because they're about you, not the other person. And we can't control another person, which is the biggest thing there about why we had to explore what became a boundary. Was it became actually a lot more about energetic boundaries for me. Was we have to be considerate with where our energy is going and responsible about that. And that's where it got messy, because that became very hard to manage and juggle and learn.
Was that because you sensed, like, you know, him emotionally leaving you or not being present, or you being caught up in pursuing something else?
Well, here's the thing, is that there's other energies involved. And so you can have boundaries that you establish, but then you will have another person who, and this is where another label I think might come in you as well, is that they have I think it's referred to as tabletop polyamory, and that is where everybody is like on the same level, all in the same conversation, and it's open dialogue through everybody. And so we didn't really have that in our first run, and that's kind of where it got messy, was because we could try and manage our energy and boundaries as best as possible, but there was this completely unaccountable person that had no responsibility in our relationship. And so that became a big boundary then, is whoever is invited into this space has to have a responsibility in that space. And so that became a boundary. Pardon?
How do you set that up?
Through trial and error, and hurt and intensity. So yeah, that was really tricky, because we've definitely had other people involved who have not held responsibility or acted in integrity, and that's been really emotional, I guess. But again, those emotions being, each one of those intense interactions was that invitation to level up. Well, how do we want to respond here? What's the next move? What's the next boundary? And I think it's important to keep revisiting boundaries. So for a really long time, my boundary was no friends that I don't want to have to navigate a friendship and a relationship at the same time and have that altered, because my friendships are a very big part of my support network. And that was a very, very firm boundary for me for quite some time, until recently I've been reviewing it, realizing that a boundary is not the same for me as what it is for my partner. It's not the same as what it would be for Julie and her partner, and it's not the same as what it would be for Bridget and her partner. You know, we have different ideas of boundaries. We have different things that we are and are not okay with. And so through, again, many, 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 many more conscious conversations, that then became a more fluid boundary of, okay, well, I understand that there is a desire for you not to necessarily meet new people, but have deepened connections with people that you may already know. And so that was, again, that's an example of a boundary being fluid and being revisited. For me going, no, you stay away from people that we both know, to, wow, the world is quite large and sometimes it feels really small and we know a lot of people. And so how do I revisit that without feeling like I'm imposing a rule upon you? What will I not do? Not can I tell you what you can't do? So boundaries, again, still are something that just gets revisited often, and a lot of the time you won't really know what it is until it's pushed. But so rather than trying to use boundaries as a protective measure or preempting and preventing shit from hitting the fan, why don't we change that conversation and flip it around to how do we upskill so when the shit does hit the fan, we've got the skills to meet it?
Totally.
Yeah.
Was your version of open relating to do with having sex outside of the relationship, or it involved emotional entanglement?
Both. It was quite funny because I thought that emotional intimacy was my boundary first. So I think I'm quite an intuitive person, and I knew that my partner had feelings for this person before he voiced them to me. And so I'd already sat in this little place of discomfort before it was even spoken of, do I feel betrayed by emotional intimacy? And I had to really sit with that because I'm very emotionally intimate with a lot of people. And so it didn't feel fair to decide that I didn't want my partner to do that with someone else, because I know how much richness that brings into my life. So I'd already sort of sat in that discomfort, and that's probably why I had less of a reactive response when he initially said it, because I had probably done a little bit of pre-work myself in that moment. But yeah, so initially it was, I think my partner was seeking that emotional intimacy from other people. And then funnily enough, what I found was that I was seeking sexual connection with other people. And so I was like, my life's already full, rich of emotional intimacy. I've got all of these people I can have these wonderful communications with, and not just verbal, but just so many points of connection that feel fulfilling to me. But sexually, there's a lot there for me to explore and fulfill, and I really, really want to. So both of us being brave enough to say, this is what I want, this is what my soul is calling for, this is what I need in my life, how do we navigate this together, is, it's definitely brought us closer together, and our sex life is the best that it's ever been in over 14 years. And we're still meeting different needs, which is a big point of why I'm open to still being open, is that I just truly feel that one person cannot meet all of our needs, and we all have different needs. And so it's on us to explore and express and meet them. And we can invite as many people as we want to do that with us, but we've got to be courageous and choose that.
Totally. Has it gotten messy for you in terms of your obviously parents as well? Because that's often something I find clunky, is what does that look like when you're no longer just navigating yourselves as individuals and adults in the world through open relating, but essentially by virtue of being parents, you're also moving children through that experience. And as children grow with bigger awarenesses around what that looks like, and at the same time, I'm like, how do you make time to go and do those things when life is already so full, being so busy with kids? So now I'm busy in my normal life, and I'm trying to date and navigate fluctuations in feelings with other people. Like, I'm just like, that's a lot of...
Yeah, well, that's the energy and attention thing that I was talking about earlier. So that's exactly right. That's the word that was stuck there, bandwidth. So that was my initial, was like, you don't have the bandwidth for this. You don't have the bandwidth for this. Someone's asking more of you, and I'm not asking enough of you. So how are you going to meet all of this? So, yeah, that's definitely something that was a very fucking valid point to bring up, because, again, bringing it back to beyond the form and beyond it being about the relationship structure, it's the skills that we develop to meet that and the growth that we get from that. So when it comes to parenting, it's not a conversation I sit down and have with my children, this is what mum and dad are doing, because that's an adult conversation. But learning about communication skills and repair skills and being honest and also responsible for our energy and behavior, like having big conversations about that, you can feel other people's energy around you, but you have to take responsibility for the energy that's within your own body and know about energetic boundaries. And I think those are conversations that aren't too adult to be having with children. I think that we should all be practicing that, because it's a lifelong skill, and we can start learning it in our youth and keep practicing till we get to a point of mastery in adulthood where it really flares up.
I love this so much. I have to go because I have a client session, but I'm loving this conversation so deeply. I look forward to hearing it in the podcast replay. And you're coming into Soul Driven Motherhood for a deepened and expanded conversation. So I'm very much looking forward to sinking our teeth in further from there. So Bridget's going to carry you forwards. And I'm really I'm so grateful. It's such a beautiful and valuable conversation. And I appreciate so much your vulnerability and authenticity. It's a gift. So thank you.
Angels. So yes, Dasha, Julie took us where I wanted to go next, which was looking at that, how do I show up for my family, knowing that I'm kind of restructuring what I bring or what we bring to the family as the leaders of this family, and what do I share and not share, and what do we each call each other to account on in order that you're not compromising that focus of raising a family. Has that been a challenging one to navigate, both within yourselves and also with the perceptions of others who I imagine may also have these questions of you or more traditional family values might throw at you?
Yeah, definitely. I'm just going to think on that one for a second. Look, I think it is tricky, like in any sort of pursuit that we take outside of our family home, where it can feel distracting while we're mastering the skills of expanding that bandwidth. But I also think it's valuable that when we think about the family structure, what it's there for, what its purpose is for me, I view that as it's for creating a sense of safety and belonging in the world. And so that's our responsibility to our children, is to help them have this innate sense of safety and belonging. And so that goes beyond any form. So it doesn't matter what the relationship status is of the parents, if the skills and the sensations of feeling safe and belonging are there and continuously being cultivated, that's what's more important than how many people mum and dad love.
Yes, I really love that you've gone there, because it's so true. And I mean, even in conversations and discussions around divorce, it's like children can get through that if parents handle it well.
Exactly. And also a really, really big, maybe too profound of a statement to make, is that the love is just, it's not finite. It's not finite. And I think that's really valuable to teach children. And even just in the context of children, when you have a second child, you don't love your first child any less. There's more love. It's more love. And what a valuable thing to teach our children, that they can be more loved in the world, that nobody owns them, that they don't belong to anybody else, and that love is not scarce.
It's beautiful. When you were talking earlier about your partner and you found that through this process where you pigeonholed him had kind of blown up and you're now seeing new aspects to him, was there new attraction that you found in meeting that?
Oh, definitely. There was both, because it's always
attraction and repulsion.
If we actually look properly at things, it is always both, right? Yes, so it's definitely our sex life went through the fucking roof, because the level of intimacy that was being cultivated through these constant, honest, vulnerable conversations was very desirable to me. Like that.
And desire, and I guess the birthplace of desire is in mystery. And so if there's no mystery, then there's no desire. So in fact, this whole process has unlocked mystery.
100%. And the other point that I had just floated out of my brain space. No, that's fine. I do this to people all the time. It's all right. It'll come back to me if it's important.
It's all right. If you were, so you've said that this is.
Oh, sorry. No.
Yes.
It's both. It's important we do both. Yes, there was mystery and more desire, but there were also aspects of him that I had to revisit the judgments. Like, you're not dating how I would date. I wouldn't do that in a situation. Why are you behaving like that? That's not how you do it. And so a really valuable conversation we had is like a review after our sort of first run at the show was allowing another person to have their own experience without trying to manipulate and control it to serve you. But just allow, which is very, very hard when you have built a whole life with someone as a shared experience, to then allow them to have their own, especially when you can see aspects of it that they can't, or you're experiencing something from it that they're not. It's still very, very hard to be like, you are your own person. This is your own experience that you get to have, that you need to have. It's part of your growth, and it's not for me to interrupt and interfere. So then, those are, again, really tricky conversations where there's no right or wrong, but it was both. It was incredibly hot and also incredibly messy.
And also, I imagine if you're really initiated into your own sovereignty through this process, then you can't have yours without allowing them theirs. And so that looks like, how do I build myself and shatter a lot of perhaps my codependency to come back into myself so that I can allow them to be who they are.
Exactly.
Which is also what we ask ourselves as parents too, is that how much am I trying to control or more or cajole or morph or direct, and how much can I allow that person to be, even if that challenges me?
Yeah. And it will challenge you. But like you said, you have those conversations already. You have them, those conversations and explorations exist in monogamous relationships. It's just, again, we can bypass a lot of them by just running our roles as they were pre-designed.
Yeah, and also Family Inc., right, can certainly crowd out those conversations, and so you end up running your own track. And of course, where you found yourself in your relationship means that you can no longer avoid those, and that the open relating is the path to exploring that.
100%. Yeah.
You said that you've had lots and lots of women in your DMs, and, really kind of, you've had all these people come out of the woodwork. Is there something that you find is a common set of questions or common conversation that you find yourself continuing to have with women around open relating?
Yeah. Women's sexuality is a really big one. I have a lot of women that have never allowed themselves to explore their sexuality properly. And so, again, they've found themselves in heterosexual relationships, and then like, I actually think that I really like women, but I've never allowed myself to explore that. And then some women who know that they like women, but they also really love the man that they're with, and they find that very confusing. So, bisexuality is can be a lonely and confusing place to be in, because especially if you are in a relationship with a man and you are attracted to women. So that is a very common thread that I've had in my messages. And the other most common one that gets spoken about beyond that is, what dating apps do you use?
That's a very practical question right there.
And I would just 100% say, I have not touched Tinder ever. I have no intention of ever touching Tinder. I've heard enough stories shared around about Tinder to make me feel yuck about all dating apps. The first thing, and what I'll say on that first point about the sexuality is that I think it's so important for us to have sovereignty about that, and it's so important. I think that so often we forget, or maybe never even learned, that pleasure is not something that's given to us.
Or someone does to you.
No, it's ours. It's ours. It's within us, and it can be opened up to and shared with another, but it's not something given to us. So we have to explore that. We have to be courageous and explore that, because no one else is going to discover it for us.
Is there a way that you offer those women to do that, who contact you?
Yeah, I do. I think that even just talking to other women on a dating app is incredibly valuable. And I know that from experience, because when I started on the dating apps, which, to the second question, Bumble is the one that I use. Bumble. And I will give that like a little bit of a mention, because what I found really good about that was that women message first. Men aren't allowed to message another woman unless she has instigated the conversation, which for me felt quite safe. I didn't want to chuck myself out there in the open and be on the receiving end of a bunch of messages that I had no filter over.
Yeah.
So Bumble, if you're a woman who's a little bit intimidated by dating apps and you'd like to talk to some other men or women, Bumble is my recommendation. There's many others I'm not super experienced with, but I've had some luck with that one. And so back to that first one, in exploring that, I think that even just having conversations with other women who do know more about their sexuality, who have a little bit more experience, so that you're able to see and imagine bigger and more than what you're in. So much like the conversation we're having now, this might be someone who is in a very happy heterosexual relationship listening to this and going, but I know there's more to me that isn't uncovered, and I'm not doing a justice to my existence by ignoring that. And how long can I really ignore that for anyway? So, yes, starting point is always starting with conversations, awareness and then conversations.
Yeah, beautiful. And particularly for many women, and I'm sure you found this perhaps too when your children were younger, that time of early childhood can also be a time of lower libido because your attachment needs are being met by breastfeeding or by, your child's constant body contact or, your lack of, sleep. And so sometimes it can be for women that they kind of come out of the fog of that and then go, oh, I know there's more.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is there anything you want to offer women before we move into our rapid fire questions?
Let me see, 'cause I also nerded out and made some notes. I think we actually covered them all. The main points here I wanted to make was with the codependency and co-regulation thing with anytime we try to make our partner responsible for how we're feeling, even if we're, pretty set in our mind that what they have done has now caused this reaction in us. You guys talk a lot about removing the form and looking at what's underneath that. And so what I would find then is that a very important marker for me to distinguish between the two was that codependency was when I was in parenting mode, either because I was craving parenting or because I was doing the parenting.
So you are either craving being parented?
Yeah. So I was either looking to my partner to fulfill whatever my father didn't or mother didn't, or I was mothering or fathering them. Rather than coming back to co-regulation, which is partnering. So
which is meeting another adult side by side.
Yeah, as a whole person. And so, that was my main point that I wanted to write there, was the difference between co-regulation and codependency in relationship is you're either parenting or you're partnering.
I love that. That's a really great, succinct definition.
Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. So we've given you in advance our quickfire questions. And so I'd love to know, the first question is, can you recall a time in your life of great heartache or breaking open that you then traversed and met and healed and it became a source of wisdom for you?
Yeah. This was really tricky because I actually had 3 big things come to mind and I honestly couldn't pick which one. Like I couldn't put in a hierarchy. There was 3 points in my life that were complete shifts and changes for me. The first was when my dad died. I nursed him till he in palliative care for 5 months, and it was incredibly heartbreaking for me because I felt helpless and I couldn't do anything. And so how I met that wound and channeled it into wisdom was that I had to focus a lot more on what I was being because I couldn't do anything. So it was my sort of introduction to noticing of my energy and what it was and manipulating it, I guess, or beginning to master it. Okay, he's not listening to me. I can't do anything to alleviate his pain or his suffering. This man is dying. All I can do is be here with him in love. That's it. I can't be here in worry. I can't be here. None of that is going to serve any purpose. What can I give him right now? What can I give myself right now? The energy of love, which might sound really fluffy, but when you're sitting next to a dying man for 5 months straight, that's literally all you can do is to be there in fear or be there in love. So that was my first heartbreak, wound to wisdom. And my second one was when my son was born, because I had a very conscious pregnancy and a very empowering birth, and then received a brutal diagnosis for his health condition when he was 4 weeks old of having cystic fibrosis, and it completely broke my heart. I felt betrayed by my body. I felt like I had betrayed him, and so that was really, really hard for me. So I went from this energy of just being love, having this incredible experience, and then like this big fear bomb went off in my world. And that was my movement. That was my shift then into movement and embodiment and being with my body and learning to love and honor it again, and remember that it hadn't betrayed me, that it was always working for me, and that having to get past this idea that I hadn't betrayed my son, that a diagnosis and a genetic disease isn't it's not a mark on somebody, it's not you are now this and this is awful and a punishment. It has its own gifts and it has its own expansion that it gave me. So that pulled me into movement and presence, because if I thought too far ahead of anything that was happening in the future with my son, then I wouldn't be here with him right now, where things were wonderful and he was beautiful and so was I. So again, coming back into that presence, but movement was really big, the really start of this big thing for me about having to move my body in a particular way. And I tried running, I tried going to the gym, and I used to go to the gym a lot before I fell pregnant with this child, a lot. I was training martial arts and all other complementary activities to support my martial arts, where I would compete, to then not moving at all because I had no grit and motivation to do that. And I was gifted a hula hoop 4 months postpartum, and that became my saving grace, because I got to be present in that moment in my body and moving beyond the fear, which then led me to my third heartbreak, which was in this initial opening of my relationship, where we reached this point where, we thought that was it, that we were done. And it wasn't this explosive, we're done. It was like a very conscious, slow, calm conversation about separating, and it broke my heart, because I was deeply, deeply present to it. I wasn't trying to avoid it, and I wasn't trying to escape it and fix it or change the other person's mind. We were literally just discussing what our options were, options that I'd never considered. And so how I turned that wound into wisdom was by coming back to myself and that sovereignty that had been invited out of me, of going, I'm okay. I will be okay. We will all be okay. Like, the end is not the end. It's just a chapter. It's just an experience. And it's not, again, like love is not finite. Choices are also not finite. We can choose this now, and we can choose something different later, and I can choose this in this moment. I can choose something else in another moment, but being present with the moment that was right there. So I guess all three of those experiences sums up into most of my wounds are centered around fears beyond the present moment and not moving from our own internal sovereignty. So
wow, those are huge, and all big invitations into deep presence, right? Like deep presence with yourself and how you move with the world and what's being brought to you. Thank you so much for sharing. Those are really beautiful, but no doubt heartbreaking at the time. Yeah. Now, we love to ask all of our guests, if you could gift a woman any book that you thought would transform her life, what would that book be?
Again, this was so hard. I have to cull my book list.
Have you got like a top 2 or a top 3 maybe?
Oh, even just a top 3. Okay. So All right. The first book that I read that really changed my life was when I had my first son, and I was experiencing postpartum anxiety, on the edge of postpartum depression, and I didn't know who the hell I was. And I went to my doctor because I didn't know where else to go. And I was like, what is wrong with me? What do I do here? And he was a great GP because you know what he did? He recommended me a book. And I went and I read this book called The Road Less Traveled. And it's been so long since I've read it that I actually wouldn't even be able to pull out points for you anymore. I just know that coming from a path of where I wasn't really very deeply spiritual and I was in a very lost space, that this book really, it really gave me something to ground into and something bigger beyond me to see and feel into. So The Road Less Traveled. And I also really think that women should read Mating in Captivity by Esther Perel. I think that touches on a lot of the points that we spoke about in here, and it talks a lot about desire and cultivating that for ourselves and interpersonally as well. And The Dance of Anger by Harriet Lerner is a classic game changer book for me as well. I still find that a very, very helpful book to refer to. It's not a page turner.
It's more of a technical kind of book, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And that's why it's something that it's good to refer to. It's not something you really sit down with a cup of tea.
You don't immerse in it. You kind of
it's work. It's work. And so that's why I think it's really valuable. I think books are extremely valuable for working on ourselves and working on our relationships, because it takes away so many of our defenses, and we get to absorb so much wisdom from other people's lived experiences when we read a book. So I literally had a book here of and I culled this list and it's down to 10. And so maybe I'll just add two more.
Add a couple more, sure.
Okay. So I'll also add Becoming Us by Ellie Taylor, because I think especially in early family arrangements, when you are finding family dynamics out initially and trying to understand that with no background, this is an excellent book for that. I actually did Ellie Taylor's training, and that was where my relationship background came from. I was working as a postpartum relationship doula, helping couples on the verge of separation going, I don't know you anymore, going, no, you don't, because you're new versions of each other. And so,
what a beautiful gift.
Yeah. So this book centers around that, about how to very practically explain and navigate and understand shifting family dynamics when we become family. And then from 1 to 2 to 5 to 7 children, it changes each time. So that's a really valuable book for probably a lot of people in soul-driven motherhood. And I'll just add one more because, again, referring back to exploring our sexuality and our sensuality, Urban Tantra by Barbara Carrell, I think, or Carrellis. It's a huge book, but it's great. It's great. It's so good. And I like it because it takes traditional Tantra philosophy of energetic dynamics and polarity and gives us a really practical exploration of how that manifests sexually and how we get to explore that ourselves. And there's a lot of stuff in there that you are invited as activities to do on your own and play with. So it's not just valuable for a greater understanding of energy, but it's also really valuable for an exploration of your sexuality.
That sounds great. Thank you. And now finally, if you could have a billboard on any superhighway, what would it say?
Oh, man, this was hard. I actually put this up in my stories. So I was like, oh, what would people expect me to say? And someone replied, follow your pleasure. Somebody else replied, don't look at me, you're driving. So I like that one.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go with that one. If I was on a billboard on the highway, I would say, don't look at me, you're driving. which is in some way part of your work. We're just pushing you back into yourself, right? Exactly.
Come back into yourself.
Yes, exactly. And I think I just wanted to round that off on that whole point of, yes, that a lot of my work is deeply centered on being within myself and acting from that space of my own internal authority, which at times has definitely pushed. I've definitely found myself like going from interdependence to fully independent, which is part of my childhood trauma responses.
Yeah.
So being consciously entering into an open relationship allows me to revisit that and realize, actually, I'm not this hyper independent person who does everything by herself. I am interdependent. I have responsibility for my own internal stuff that's going on here, but gosh, it's so valuable to have safe relationships to explore that with, because that's how we grow and how we know ourselves.
Yeah.
So yeah, I want to keep exploring that and keep getting to know myself and other people better.
Oh, this has been such a beautiful conversation, Dasha. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
No, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to actually get to have this conversation on a broader platform, because there's only so much my little thumbs can type in messages.
Oh, I'm sure it has really just touched a lot of women and opened up some curiosity that perhaps they hadn't looked at themselves, or maybe took them deeper, which is what we really hope for too. Now, you will be coming into Soul-Driven Motherhood, which I think is on the 29th of June? Yes. And you'll be taking us deeper as a group into some exploration around open relating, or just around yourself, which then leads to those conversations. So we're looking forward to that. And how can women connect with you?
You can find me on my website, which is pretty easy, dashaclarke.com, and all social media. And I'm pretty active on Instagram, so if you want to pop over there and send me a message, if you've got a question, want to have a chat, or just see what my vibe's about, there you will find me. And again, it's pretty easy. It's at Dasha Clarke.
Beautiful. Now, to connect with us, it's nourishingthemother.com.au. To connect with Julie, it is julietenner.love. And to connect with me, it's bridgetwood.life. Remember to nourish the woman, to rock the family, and we will see you next week when we continue to peel back the layers on your mothering journey. Thank you so much for listening. We literally couldn't do this without you. Please share this podcast with anyone you think it would be medicine for.
If you desire to integrate your learnings practically and supportively into your life, then head on over to bridgetwood.life or julietenner.love to go deeper.
And if you feel like giving back a little to this free content, please rate us on iTunes or Facebook, all of which helps the podcast reach more mamas who need this type of tonic for the soul.
This has been a production of TheWellnessCouch.com. Check us out on Facebook and join in the conversation on Facebook.com/TheWellnessCouch. Subscribe to each show on iTunes and check us out on Twitter. The Wellness Couch, streaming wellness into your lives.
Whilst the Wellness Couch presenter endeavor to provide accurate and helpful information to their listeners, these podcasts cannot take into account individual circumstances and are not intended to be a substitute for health and medical advice from a qualified health professional. You should always seek the advice of a qualified health professional before acting on any of the information provided by any of the Wellness Couch podcasts.